the archetype of the hero was the same 1,000 years ago. It will be the same in 1,000 years. The archetype of the dragon was the same 1,000 years. It's going to be the same. So those things, to me, they're not stereotypes. They're not tropes. They're really great things to build stories around. And yes, you can have new angles to it, but I think you go too far away from that, it doesn't work.
Hi, it's Gary Snow from the Dieku podcast, and with me is Andrew Cawood. And Andrew has been making some really great products, which I have here with me, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But Andrew, welcome to the Dieku podcast.
Thanks, Anne. Nice to be with you.
And so you are a fellow Canadian, and I know that when I first saw your products on Drive-Thru RPG, I was like immediately taken with your monster books. And it just kind of had like a nice feel to it, especially coming from my point of view of like I was off of gaming for quite a while, and coming back to it, I was like really intrigued by your products. And so well done. I really think they're amazing.
Thanks.
And but before we get started on highlighting some of your products, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into gaming in the first place.
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm here in Vancouver now. I actually started out in the city the farthest from Vancouver in the world, which is Cape Town in South Africa. So a little bit after I moved here as a kid, I think around 79, some kids from school said, "Do you want to play this Dungeons and Dragons game?" I had no idea, but it sounded really cool. And what we do is we'd play the whole day. And we'd have breaks for snacks and breaks. We'd go outside and play football, get some actual fresh air and exercise. And we'd play, like I'd say, all of Saturday and all of Sunday. And immediately I was hooked. And I think I played with them for a few months. I can't remember exactly how long. It was a long time ago. And then after maybe a year or so later, that's when I decided I want to run these games. And that's when I bought the basic and expert set and started being a DM.
Cool. So that was like the red box era of games. And with your group of friends, like, was there ever, because I was always wondering about this from other people of my vintage, was there ever a stigma around it for you growing up as far as it being a bit of a nerdy activity?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Especially like the earlier on, the more like when it started, when more people started playing around, 79, 80, the beginning of the 80s. Yeah, it was huge. It was, you definitely didn't advertise it, which made it even harder to get a group together. However, like most of the people I played with were, especially later on, like my group in junior high and high school in Alberta at the time, most of us actually were athletes. And it was like living two lives in a way. I sort of relate to, Joe Manganiello a little bit like that in terms of, I spent most of my time playing sports. And it was not something you advertised for sure.
I have a similar story because I used to play, I think I've mentioned before on my podcast, I've played pretty competitive hockey.
Oh, okay.
And so I had my D&D friends, which were like really my closest friends. And then I would go play hockey, and I was acquaintances with them, but my friends were the Dungeons and Dragons friends. So on a Friday night after the game, everybody else was going out to parties after the game, and I'd run over to my friend's house and play Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
And that was kind of my high school upbringing, and I'm kind of the similar era of you, I think. And as far as you spoke of D&D in hushed tones, like you didn't advertise it.
Oh, for sure. And it was so hard to get a group together. Like if you lost a player, to try to find a new player. Even like I lived in Edmonton at the time, and it wasn't a tiny city, it wasn't very big, but it was even hard to get like you know, you'd be lucky to find a miniature set or some of the extra resources like the Deities and Demigods book, or you know, those sort of things, or the Fiend Folio. Some of those books were harder to get.
And it's amazing what we have access to now. And I guess that's a nice segue into like, how did you maintain gaming throughout all these years, or did you ever take any breaks from it?
Oh yeah, I took a huge break. At a certain point, sports and relationships in high school around 15, 16 maybe, it just took over, and I forgot about the game. I sold all my stuff because I needed the money when I was a student in university. Probably sold it like around 87, 88 or something, which I'm sure the local gaming store was very happy to take all that stuff, because I had pretty much all of that era. I was very fortunate in that way. So I had all the modules, all the adventures. And yeah, it was only about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, I read a book called Of Dice and Men by David Ewalt about the history of Dungeons and Dragons on my holiday once. And I wondered, why did I ever stop playing this game? And I'd also been playing Skyrim, which made me very nostalgic to going back to D&D. And eventually I realized it'd be much easier to get a group together now with the internet. And the first people I contacted after my holiday were looking for a dungeon master. And I sat down, the stranger's house, they were running the game at that time. And it was like nothing had changed, partly because I was a teacher for many, many years. And the way I would teach would be mainly through storytelling and mainly through fantasy, the fantasy genre. So I'd kind of been prepping, or I'd stayed a storyteller all those years. So I actually was a much better dungeon master than I was, obviously, when I was, 10 to 15, 10 to 16, whatever it was.
And when you re-engaged with the hobby, like what was kind of your first steps as far as like what settings, what core rules that were you using?
Right. That's a good question. I mean, part of the reason is because it was the 5th edition playtest. So they had those early basic rules. And then I decided, with this group, I didn't know how long it was going to go. I didn't even know if it was going to last more than the one night. I didn't know if I would even get along with these players. And I didn't know if I would like the setting. I didn't know, So the one good thing I remember is that original group, one of the people actually wrote a few things for D&D sort of in those years that I was away. So they were very involved. They had a massive collection of miniatures, a great setup. So my first initial idea was just to build a village, a beginning of a plot, a story that could last one session, which is not really, I don't really like one shots personally. But at that point, to me, it was going to be a one shot. And then with the potential to build out, which is what I always tell people now. They ask how to start a world. I say, well, start with a village and build and keep going. I did that 6 years ago, and now I have 9 continents.
And that is your setting, World of Myrr. And how did that come about? What was the naming and the nugget of how that formed?
Yeah, well, again, it started with this village, and eventually I saw that this was going to be a success. This potential now was going to be a campaign, not a one shot. And so for some reason, Myrr came to me, and I'm a little bit suspicious because my wife and I had just met each other maybe a year before that, and we were definitely going to get married. That was in the cards, and we are now. And her name is very similar to that name, Myrr. So I think it potentially could have been subconscious, but I do spend a lot of time on my names for everything, for worlds and characters and monsters. I spend hours and hours and hours. And that one, it came really quickly and I knew it was right. And then I started to build from that village. One of the basic things I started with was a family who used to be royalty, who were still really the rightful rulers, but they'd kind of lost track of where they stood in the pecking order in the kingdom. And they'd been corrupted to a certain degree. And my long-term plot was that they were gonna gain the throne again. So that really helped me begin. And I knew I wanted I like traditional fantasy, classic, they call it epic or high fantasy. And my big love in AD&D was Greyhawk. So that's the inspiration for World of Myrr, 100% is Greyhawk.
And did you find it, say, difficult to find unique angles on trodden roads as far as like Greyhawk and other high fantasy? Like, how did you carve out your niche in that area?
Well, I think sometimes part of that is that there's been a confusion, I think, especially in RPGs, with the difference between an archetype and a trope. So archetypes never change. And people can say that, and tropes are just devices that you're going to use in a story. Some people think now that archetypes are tropes. It's not true. It's never going to change. Never. When it was the same thousands of years ago, it's going to be the same thousands of years from now. The archetype of the hero was the same 1,000 years ago. It will be the same in 1,000 years. The archetype of the dragon was the same 1,000 years. It's going to be the same. So those things, to me, they're not stereotypes. They're not tropes. They're really great things to build stories around. And yes, you can have new angles to it, but I think you go too far away from that, it doesn't work. Usually these days, a lot of stories get too dark and the balance is off. For example, the Sherlock TV series on BBC, great show. But the last season, they got too dark and the whole thing fell apart, because the show was now just darkness. It wasn't interesting. It wasn't a heroic battle anymore, a heroic adventure. So for me, I keep a lot of those archetypes. I keep a lot of those things that are universal. And then I have some new twists. Like there's a lot of politics in my World of Myrr. And one of the main things was that it's a world that had found a nice, comfortable balance. And now that balance was gone. And so when the players start playing in Myrr, it's just shifting. And it's shifting politically, it's shifting, the climate is shifting. And now the players have to deal with, and all the factions have to deal with a world where everything is about to shift and change.
Well, I mean, it's an exciting setting, and especially, I mean, your creative monsters that kind of fit within the world. Those are amazing, and we'll cover those in a second. But
sure,
when was the first moment that you said, okay, I'm going to actually write some supplements or adventures, and how did that take place as far as you putting pen to paper and going, I'm going to create this?
Right. Well, it really was that my World of Myrr with my players, they connected so much at that point, especially because one of the players used to write for D&D. They all said, including him, you have to publish this. And they encouraged me to go to some small publishers who I looked at, some other third-party publishers. But I don't really feel an affinity for any of those companies. Usually, again, for me, they're too dark. There's a lot of, to me, like if you look at 5th edition, a lot of 5th edition so far has been, I love the system. But the content, a lot of it has been making excuses for evil creatures. First, it was making excuses for vampires, then beholders, then witches. And it's like, again, they don't understand what an archetype is. So for me, it was those players saying, we really love these stories. You really should try to publish it. And I thought, yeah, that's sort of a good idea. I wasn't really that interested, even though, like, if you look at my life, it made total sense. I mean, I'd done that as a kid. My favorite subject in school was English by far. My first university years were very unsuccessful, but because I was in the wrong area, I started in business. But when I finally got to what I loved, which was literature, and later education and counseling, but I have all that background. And then as a teacher, being a storyteller for years and years and years, I knew how to do it. So the players encouraged me, and it just, again, the timing, it happened that the new license for third parties was just coming out. And so I decided to try to kickstart Myrr first. I soon realized that you can't kickstart something with no online footprint and very little history of doing anything as far as publishing and writing. So it didn't work. So I decided to do it myself, to fund the art and to do the best layout that I could do. And I published it on Drive-Thru, and that was the beginning of what we're doing now. I never thought it would grow to this. It was very much, moving from homebrew to publishing.
And when you think about your digital footprint now compared to what you're, or from back then to what you're doing now,
Yeah.
like, is it obviously, like, I mean, I discovered you through online social media as well,
Right.
and Drive-Thru RPG. And how long did it take you to build up that kind of an audience? And was it like in leaps with new products, or was it incremental?
For the most part, it was stages. It was leaps. It took a long time. I'm really glad that I focused on Instagram at a certain point. Twitter was really the beginning for us, using Twitter. And then Facebook has slowly grown, although people aren't as active on it. But the real driver in a lot of ways has been Instagram. I think partially because of the artists that we use. And also we post our games and so people can see, we really enjoy this game, myself and my players. And we test everything out that we write about. And we play in every adventure and world that we're writing about and use every monster. So it's more a lifestyle. Like, I'm fortunate that I can usually play once a week or so, and I can spend most of my days creating.
And are you now a full-time designer? Is that your full occupation?
Yeah. Only full-time since September, because my daughter's in school now. So before that, I was looking after her and writing on the side. So all those, the first four of our Monster series books were all published part-time, which was challenging, especially last year, because I had no office, or for the last 2 years, I had no office. I had to do it basically at the kitchen table. We moved in the summer, so now I actually have a proper space here.
And when you talk about like the leap to the monsters and like that creativity, but you first started out with like some supplements like Dungeon Master handbooks and tavern guides and like that kind of thing.
Right.
When did you stop doing the supplements and like concentrate more on your world building?
Well, we still do supplements here and there, but the focus now is mostly on the monster, especially this year, is on the monster series and finishing our World of Myrr. What happened again was different stages, and also just very fortunate, because not long after publishing World of Myrr on Drive-Thru, the DMs Guild was created. And so I realized, I have all of this great, all these great resources for dungeon masters, encounter tables and lists of like mounts and all these all these resources and things that I have in the World of Myrr, which I can add to as well. These would be really useful for dungeon masters, save a lot of time of coming up NPC books. Like we have tons of NPC books. And I use all these books at my table to save me time. You know, we have a treasure book, which the DMG doesn't organize the treasure really well for you. You have to look through multiple tables, just like back in the day. So we have a book that organizes it all called Treasured Finds. And we have tons of NPC books if you need characters or if you need pre-made characters. So all that was very fortunate. And then I think after about 2 years of publishing on the DM's Guild and drive through with the World of Myrr, that's when I saw Travis Hansen's art and went, wow. And he doesn't have just one style. People think sometimes he just does his Life of the Party cartoon style, but he actually has a few variations. So I could see that a variation of that art would be a really interesting new look for D&D. There hasn't been a lot of comic art for D&D. And I liked his balance of more heroic, more fun, humor, a little bit of edgy, a little bit of dark. And then when we met each other online, we just got on like, you know, a house on fire. Like we're basically the same age. We both are staying at home looking after our kids. We want the same kind of creations out in the world. We want the hero, we want the heroic adventure. We want to, you know, that's what we want to highlight. So yeah, a lot of synchronicity.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna launch here my screen so that we can all take a look at it. It was Monsters of Feyland your first?
That's the first book in the Monsters series. Yes. Yeah.
And as you can see, Travis's art here on the cover of it, and like you said, it's got a bit of a comic style to it, but it does, as you said, it kind of fits nicely into D&D though. I was quite taken with it myself. Like when I first saw it, I went, I have to get it. And also too, I'll tell you a little bit about, as I was getting back into learning about design myself, and I went that this was a print on demand product through Drive-Thru RPG. So these two books, I actually purposely went, okay, I really like the books. I want to see what it's like in soft cover, and I want to see what it's like in hardcover. So I ended up, you were my my first tester. I went, okay, I want to see how they do it. So that was like inspirational for me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So the names themselves, I mean, some of them are standard D&D fare, but a lot of them, I really like the creativity that you kind of bring into a lot of the names and combinations that you design. And how fun is that? Like, what is that? I would guess probably one of the most fun parts of your games and your designs.
Yeah, definitely. For me, one of the most fun parts of writing is playing with words. I like using sometimes words from other languages. I speak French too, so if you see there's quite a bit of French combinations of words at times. There's a few actually creatures from South Africa, which there's one in every book so far, every monster book. So I've used the names straight from South Africa. Like in the Feyland book, there's the protea, which is the national flower actually back in South Africa. So I made it a giant, like, man-eating plant. In the Underworld book, there's the boomslang, which is a big snake there. And in the City book, there is the jawler, which is sort of a joke, actually, because a jawler is kind of a sort of a teen rebel, sort of with attitude. So I made my version of that. And then the Wilderness book. Oh, of course, in the new book, I have a Weir meerkat. Yeah, and then also every book, for some reason, there's been a David Bowie creature. That's just sort of happened. So yeah, there's a lot of musical influences too.
That's cool. And I think I noticed there's a guitar in your background of your video. So are you a
Yeah.
musician?
Well, learning to play guitar. I've done a few different instruments, but music is definitely a huge inspiration. Yeah.
I really liked the Doubt Trout. I don't know why, but that's kind of when I was flipping through the books, that was the one that I went, that's kind of just like fun. And that probably speaks to your lightheartedness with the books. And do you have like a sense of your audience of who's been buying your books, like the age category and the demographics?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly the general D&D audience, which is in general younger people. So, the core, I think, of D&D still as a younger group, probably 20 to 40 years old. However, because it's funny, people have had a hard time kind of classifying us because we're not really the new kind of new school. We're not grumpy grognard, sort of extreme old school. I think we're sort of both, but we definitely have a lot of old school influences. The interesting thing too was the Doubt Trout was a lot of learning. There were about half a dozen creatures in that book that I thought, oh, they're a bit over the top. And I don't know if I really want to use this. And then something inside of me said, no, just do it. Just do it. And all of those creatures, including one we're looking at here, the Frog Witch, all of those creatures I was wondering about were all the favorites. So I learned, when I have a really unique idea and I feel like I'm really going for it, just do it. Do not hold back and do not try to be too safe. Just go for it. So that's where the Doubt Trout is from. And the Goblin King, here's another example. That's another one. I thought, wouldn't it be hilarious if there was a goblin who somehow had learned about the Labyrinth movie? Just, I know there's a lot of suspension of disbelief there, but say there was a goblin who dressed up like Bowie in the Labyrinth movie, who was the Goblin King. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, some of them too, I have often gone like, how come nobody's thought of this before? It's like, when there's like such a clever idea, right, and then you look at it and you go like, why haven't people done this before? So you've, and maybe going back to one of my original comments was like, you've managed to take something that I thought was tired and maybe worn out, and you've
Right.
taken a new spin on it. And I think it's pretty amazing that you've been able to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think again, we go for, we make sure that we connect to those archetypes. And here's another example, the Hatter. But then we want to do something different. And even mechanically, we're even in the new book, and that's going to be coming out soon. We take more and more chances mechanically. We try to come up with some new ideas. And here's an example with the Hatter where his actions, his attacks are all throwing magical hats with really unusual effects.
And the Headless Horseman. And
Mm-hmm.
So what's your process for, okay, you come up with an idea, and then how does it get to Travis, and how many iterations in time does that take?
Sure. So first, when I'm designing the overall book, Travis and I have a talk about, the whole, what's the whole theme of the book? What is the story? And they're usually, like, every book really has an overall story, and they become more and more campaign books, especially the city book and the new wilderness book, because that's what customers have asked for, is they want more of a campaign book, not just a monster book. So Travis and I discussed the whole overall concept, and it's a negotiation where I usually bring him back from being too dark. And he kind of helps my satire not hit people over the head. So I pull back on my satire a bit, or my overt satire at times, and we try to find a balance there. And then, overall the design is still mine, but I definitely want his input. I respect his input, and I want him to be a partner. And so once I have that, then I start creating the creatures, which they happen a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's a name. Sometimes it's building off another creature. Sometimes it's a myth. Like in the new Wilderness book, I got a whole lot of the creatures from, well, not a lot, I'd say maybe half a dozen creatures or so from mythology in the United Kingdom. So sometimes our books the creatures are from myth. And then I write the book. Once that's all done, I give it to layout. And this is our process only since the city book. The first two books were the Feyland book and the Underworld book. It wasn't so smooth and it wasn't as organized. But now I write everything, I give it to layout. And then it goes to Travis, so he knows exactly what space he's dealing with. He has the stat block and the bio to look at for the illustration. And then I send him an art list of descriptions of the creatures. And he usually does a sketch, sends it to me. If I like the sketch, we go to ink stage. And then that goes to color. And he's drawn over 400 creatures for me now, 400. And I've asked him to redo it, the sketch part, maybe twice. And I've asked for tweaks maybe a dozen times at the most. Usually we are right on. And when there's creatures where I've given him tons of room to create, like I've given him a very simple description, which doesn't happen that much. But when I give him tons and tons of room where he's designing, like, as far as the image, 80%, 90% of it, I love it like 98% of the time. And that's the way that I feel about working with creative people, including the layout person, including Travis, the artist, and other artists we've worked with, is that I'm an artist. I don't want someone telling me too much about how to create. And I would, if I was them, I wouldn't want that either. So I really, for the most part, let the other artists I work with do their thing. And I'm kind of the project man. I am the project manager, and I will tweak things.
And here we're looking at Monsters of the Underworld. Was that your second one?
Yes. And that's really inspired by the D1-3 series from Gygax in the 80s, the Underworld series that really focused on the drow. So that book, that's really, and there's a drow city. So that's where that comes from. It's really mostly Gygax's work in the 80s and Tolkien.
Let me just get the heart of it here. Some of the good monsters. Well, went too far. I wanted to.
Yeah. So there was the Crystal Dragon. Travis and I both love to use the setting and all the elements of the terrain.
Yeah.
And here's our hero. So this is sort of more the beginnings of when we started to create more of a campaign book than just a monster book. So we came up with this monster hunter who's sort of a Jedi-like character, but a kind of a monk as well. well, I guess Jedi are kind of monks. And this was before The Witcher even. I didn't know about The Witcher when we were designing this Monster Hunter. So that just shows you how, again, archetypes are real and they do not change. And people can create work with archetypes in completely different parts of the world at the same time. So.
And the Crystal Dragon.
Yeah. Oh, there's a good story right here, actually. Originally, my first monster was going to be an angel for the book. I thought it would be a neat idea if there was an angel in the Underdark fighting evil. Again, I like to have some heroes in these books. And then I realized that the first monster alphabetically, because we were going A to Z at that point, was going to be an angel. And I knew there's no way we could start an underworld book of monsters with the first thing being an angel. So there are changes we make like that. That was a last minute change.
And when you come up with the monsters, like how many end up making the cut to be in the book and how many get left off for like maybe a future edition?
I'd say about 70% of the original list goes into the book. And then a number of those have gone into later books as well. Yeah. Yeah, there's no problem with amount of monsters.
And with the layout part of it too, like, I mean, that's kind of an interesting aspect that you actually do the layout first and then have Travis fit into the spot. Do you ever change things up on after that, where Travis does something that it doesn't quite fit in the design and then you kind of change the layout afterwards?
Rarely. We started doing that in the city book when I brought a new layout person in. His name is Gordon McAlpin. He's also a writer, designer, super talented, creative guy. And he will do that at times, but yeah, for the most part, once we set the layout, we've set the spaces, but we have had a few changes. There are some very creative things that Gordon and Travis have done too. I love in the city book, there was a very small horizontal space at the top of one of the pages in the layout, but the character happened to be a lazy spellcaster. So Travis decided, hey, I could just have him lying down, which worked perfectly. So.
And now we're looking at the city book here.
Yeah.
Do you recall which, off the top of my head, I don't know which one that would be. Do you recall?
Which monster?
Which was laying down?
Oh yeah, that was Lothar the Lethargic. He's in the back in the sewer district. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get to him. But you know, it's a really like solid product, and it seems like every version you get just a little bit more polished with it and a little bit more into your groove. But how has it been as far as like the sales go? And we don't need the details of how many or anything like that.
Right.
But where do you find, like, between Kickstarter and Drive-Through RPG, like where do you find your audience gravitating towards?
Well, the Kickstarters are definitely a big part of the year. So far, we've done one Kickstarter usually a year, and we've done the last 4 have been the Monster series. So a lot of our years focused around that event, the Kickstarter. And our next one is likely in May for the 5th book. And then Drive-Through is our main platform, although we do sell our PDFs on our own site now as well. But Drive-Through with the print-on-demand option, and they do a very good job. I've bought other books, older, I've kind of put together my old first edition collection again, getting print on demand books from them as well. And they're great to work with. And then we use a printing company during the Kickstarter who is also amazing to work with. So yeah, mostly people find our products on DriveThruRPG, sometimes our website, and then the Kickstarter event is a big part of the year.
And how much effort do you put into like the kickstarting portion of it, just driving people to follow it so they're notified? Like, what kind of tools and techniques do you use to get people interested in it to begin with?
Right. Well, that's a good question because that's changed so much. So the first book, we really just said, here's the cover, it's on Kickstarter, and then we notified all, we had it on social media. Luckily, I mean, and that is still our most popular book by far. Luckily, that was a success. And when I first held the hardcover Feyland book in my hands, I suddenly knew what I'd been doing for 3 years, like where I was going. That's where I was going, to make something like that. So now it's much more organized now. Now we send out a link to people that the Kickstarter is going to launch in about a month, and people can sign up, which is much easier. You get a quick notification that the Kickstarter is live. We get our Kickstarter reviewed by a number of people who are in the industry. We, again, get it all over social media. We have a video made, and the videos have got better and better over time, I believe. And now we have a YouTube channel where we can promote the books. We do book reviews there, and we can do promo for the Kickstarter. And yeah, it's a more organized. We have more graphics that are being specifically made for the promotion part of the Kickstarter. Again, most of that promotion in terms of the design is now handled by Gordon, who does the layout for the books as well, and he does the videos. So it is much more organized and much more methodical than when we started doing that series.
If you had to kind of guess, I know I've heard this from a number of other creators that in their Kickstarter, there's that spike, of 3 or 4 days
Right.
at the beginning.
Right.
And then there's like the lull, and then people have that that last little push at the end of, they get reminded, oh, you followed this Kickstarter, but you haven't funded it. And
Right.
how have you been able to kind of maintain that so you don't get that big hump at the beginning? And how do you smooth out the middle part?
Right. Good question again. Well, one way is to not reveal everything in the Kickstarter in the initial flurry in the beginning of the first week or so. So what we do is we have art for the whole period, for the whole promotion period, and we reveal that slowly through the promotion period. We also, as I said, in each book there's really a story, especially starting with the Underworld book. So we start to tell that story during the process of the Kickstarter so that people can follow along. And on one level, that story is an exploration of that world, that campaign setting. And then we can reveal the creatures that are living there. So it's to make the Kickstarter, a narrative and a journey. And again, I'm interested in the heroic journey. So we have a hero who's going through that journey, and the people who are following along and our backers, because you don't just have to think about the new backers, you have to give something to your backers who've already joined on, and the people who've helped us the whole way through our 6 years. So we want to give them a story. We want to reveal new art. I mean, the main reason we're doing it is that it's practical. These products are practical for the game. They're useful, but also that they're inspiring. and not just for the game. I used to think that it was just for the games, but it's not at all. And so all of those things we can keep doing during the promotion period. Sometimes we've had events in that middle portion. We've had monster battles, which are on our YouTube channel. And yeah, there are a number of ways to keep that interest. Hopefully you have a few reviews of your Kickstarter, and you can reveal those in that middle portion of the Kickstarter to get yourself interviewed on one of the great YouTube shows like Dieku Games. So there's a number of ways of making sure you've got a balanced Kickstarter as much as possible. But part of it is just the bell curve. Part of it is just, the way that your dice roll, most of the time you're going to roll your D20, it's going to roll in the middle. So in the Kickstarter world, most of the action is at the beginning and the end. It helps, obviously once your Kickstarter is for sure going to fund, then you have a lot more people join in. So everybody, of course, wants that to be earlier on to help with momentum. However, I think our first 4 Kickstarters, maybe, we just funded in the last few days. The first 4 successful ones we had. We only got there the last few days.
And with that said, like, do you ever think, boy, if that had not got there in the final few days, where would I be in my game design career?
Well, as I said, the first Kickstarter we did for the World of Myrr didn't work. I think we tried to raise $4,000. We raised maybe 1,000, which in Kickstarter, the Kickstarter world means you don't get anything. So I could have been I was disappointed, but I just said, I'm going to figure out a way, I'm going to get this published, and we did. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not the kind of person who looks back. And if there are bumps in the road, I have the attitude of, I'm going to try to figure out a way to do it. So yeah, I mean, along the way, like my wife's good friend is an editor back east in Canada, and she came on board for a while at the beginning to help me with layout. So there's been a lot of there were some people who did some things for free for me early on, which now that would not happen. So you have to just kind of roll with the punches, and yeah, like I said, that initial Kickstarter, we figured out we have to do this better next time.
And I think I mentioned to you before in leading up to our interview today, that the thing that really strikes me is you really have the vibe of an indie game, like not even Dungeons and Dragons, but like the vibe of an indie game, but obviously it's tied to, the Dungeons and Dragons and the 5e. Do you ever think of there's rumors or speculation that they're going to do a 6e or a 5.5,
right?
And everything from they're going to lock out people from designing for those things. And do you ever worry about hitching your horse to something, or is it obviously it's been a benefit thus far?
Yeah, again, I would just kind of roll with it. I mean, like you say, our creatures in our books, you could really use with a lot of different games. I mean, you could very easily use it with Pathfinder. You could use it with other editions in Dungeons and Dragons. I know people who bought the book just for the art. I know people who use the book to homeschool their kids. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you could use our products. And initially when I started Cawood Publishing, I wasn't ever thinking, oh, I'm just going to write RPG stuff, RPG resources. I was never thought that. I thought, I'd like to write children's books, maybe like to write an RPG myself in terms of a system. So Travis and I have lots of other ideas if the license is ended for that. It sounds like 5.5 is going to be backwards compatible from everything I've heard. So far, yeah, there's nothing, no indication for us to change. We have at least 2 more of these Monster Series books planned out. One kickstarting in May and one probably next year. And then the Myrr book, hopefully kickstart that this fall. And then we'll see. It's again, like, I know there's been a change recently with stat blocks for monsters. I'm not interested in changing. I don't think it really changes too much. I think in games in general, the gaming community, there's a lot of overthinking things. Like the 5e rules are so smooth, so efficient. The original ones, I don't know why you would want to change too much. And I know young kids who can figure them out. So I don't understand when people say there's too much math or the bonus action is clumsy. I don't think it's too difficult. And yeah, right now we're not going to change anything, and but that doesn't mean we don't.
Any temptation to do like a Greyhawk box set for the World of Myrr?
Oh, I would love to do that. We'll have to look at the costs for a box. The most likely thing is a book that I'm working on now that has all 9 continents. And we have a world map, we have continent maps. The rest of the continent maps are going to be done. And then what I would probably have is a print-on-demand version for appendices for the book, appendices. So, for example, we include all of the inns and taverns in each continent in the book right now. So the World of Myrr book, that continent, has every single tavern and inn in it. And the Nairn continent book has every single tavern and inn. So in the big book, we're not going to do that. That would be a supplement. And we'd make a supplement probably for NPCs. So that's what it looks like for the fall. And I have probably 70% of that is written.
And I guess, kind of closing up our interview today.
Yeah.
When you think about your time with the red box and starting out, and then your long gap,
right,
and then now your obvious success, and you're doing it as a full-time creator. Mm-hmm. Do you ever go, this is what I was meant to do all those years ago, and fate has finally come to play out?
Yeah, it sure looks like that by accident. I mean, I remember, and I'd forgot about the game. I'd forgot about my involvement in the game, about how I used to write modules. I remember the first one I wrote, I drew a picture of a beholder in a cavern. I think it was the whole idea of that adventure was the home of a beholder. So, and how much time I spent at that time writing and working on those games. And then, like I said, teaching using the fantasy genre. And I would create these really intricate stories with puppets from the class, from my students, with mysteries. And then when I worked in the hotel business for quite a while, and the way I would tell stories, including right now, it's really never changed. If I look back now, it's really just telling stories. And the first love was fantasy, was that kind of world of wizards and dragons. And yeah, so it does look, it all fits together now, but it's been quite a winding road.
Well, once again, I really like your products. I think they really are a unique product within the broader spectrum of Dungeons and Dragons and 5e, and I think your team have done an incredible job of bringing them out. And I can't wait to see your Kickstarter in May, the 5th monster book. And
right.
And I'll put all of the details in the show notes as far as where we can find you on social media and your website. And and Kickstarter. So, Andrew, thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate it, and all the best to you in the future.
Thanks, Gary. It was fun.